Okay, for this project you're going to need a piece of paper, a pen, a pencil with an eraser or separate, and a ruler or something else you can use to draw a straight line, like a book or a cereal box or anything you might have laying around. I've got a standard piece of paper here. It's a rectangle. I recommend starting with a square. Makes the image look a little bit better and also gives you a little bit less space to have to fill in. So what I'll do is I'll measure the width. This one's 9 inches. And then I'll make 2 marks going the long way, starting from the same side at 9 inches. And you want to have 2 so you can line them up and make sure that you have an even line and you actually end up with a square and not with a rectangle again, or rhombus. Once I have that, I can fold the paper. If you want to use scissors or a paper cutter, if you have a paper cutter, that's great. If you don't, or if you're worried that scissors might leave too jagged a line, you can just fold and crease the paper and fold it back and forth 5 or 6 times, pressing down firmly over the crease each time, making sure just push it down. That's going to weaken the fibers so that you can actually create a little tear on that and pull it away from the paper. Notice I'm pulling out to the side, not pulling up, pulling out, holding the paper with my other hand, and it will rip right along that crease. A little jagged, but it works. Once I have that, I'm going to take my ruler or straight edge, line it up with the edge of the paper, and with my pencil, draw a border on the inside all the way around. So I'm going to go here to here, over here, and over here. So now I've gone all the way around the paper, creating an even border, and I'm ready to begin drawing. Let me zoom in a little bit. Okay, to draw, I'm going to draw a curvy line from one side to the other. It does not matter which sides. I like to add a little bit of variety into my lines so that there's some interest. If you draw a line that's too wavy like this, it's going to be very difficult to work with. And if you draw something where it just changes so predictably, that's going to be kind of boring. So having a little bit of variety makes it look a little bit more interesting. I'm going to draw a companion line with that one. I've varied the thickness a little bit as well, so that it's thicker in some parts, thinner in others. Make it look like a ribbon traveling through space. I'm going to label that with the number 1. Press softly, because that will be erased later, and I don't want it to be stuck on the paper. So now my next step is to add 7 more ribbons. And to do that, I'm going to start anywhere I like and pass under the top ribbon. Now, I want to be mindful that when I'm drawing on the other side, that these 2 lines visually connect. So I can draw along and hop across with my pencil and continue. Some people find it easier to just come up to the edge and draw softly across and then continue, and then you can just erase that part, whatever you're most comfortable with. But make sure that these 2 lines visually are connected. Now this second ribbon is broken into several pieces. I want to make sure that every piece is labeled with the number of that ribbon. This is ribbon number 2, so each piece gets the number 2 in it. Same thing is going to happen with my next ribbons. So now it's up to you how complicated you want to make your path. But each section is going to get that number. So I'm going to continue on. They don't have to be long. They don't have to be windy. So that's number 4. think number 5, we'll start over here. And then maybe go that way. Yeah, why not? They can overlap, well not overlap, I guess it would underlap. But they can pass under each other, travel along. And you see it's starting to get confusing. My empty spaces are starting to look like my ribbons. So that's why it's very important to make sure you're labeling as you go along. Let's see, let's go there, there. Seven is going to be right behind number 4. Right. And my last one, I think I'll make it a short one. Okay, so now that I've got all my ribbons filled, drawn in, all labeled, you can do more if you want. You should have a bunch of ribbons and some empty spaces. If your empty spaces are too big, you're going to want to add some more ribbons, or maybe restart if you made your ribbons too skinny. You want to have a little bit of space to work with them, right? But once you've got that, you're going to take your pen, switch over to the pen, and now in that empty space, I'm going to fill it with hatching and cross hatching. And that empty space is going to be the darkness around the ribbons. It's going to be the darkest area in my picture. So I want to get my hatching pretty tight, pretty close together. The first couple of marks, if you're not familiar with this process, might, the control is going to be a little bit tricky, but by the time you get to the last couple, you'll have pretty good control. You also might find your wrist will get tired. That's fine, take a break. I like to make all my lines more or less in the same direction so it looks consistent. Right, because after I fill everything in, I want the appearance to be unified. And what's nice is I can always make these areas darker. So even if they don't get super dark right now, I can add more lines later to make them darker. Can't really make them lighter. So I'm going to continue doing that for every empty spot, every little one, every big one, every empty spot. Trying to get it close to black, right? Short of coloring in. So let me skip ahead to the next step. So here I've gone and shaded in all the empty areas all over, and I'm ready to begin shading on my ribbons. Now what I want to imagine is that there's a light shining down from above onto all of these ribbons, just like the camera view is now. That means that the topmost ribbon here is going to be catching all the light. Number 1 is going to be getting all the light. There'll be no shadow on number 1. But number 1 will be casting shadow onto all of the ribbons below it. So I'm going to move down in order onto number 2. So number 2, I follow along, and I find that it passes underneath number 1 right here. And it emerges on the other side right there. That means there and there's going to be shadow on either side. So now what I'm going to do is add some hatching along that space to show that there's shadow there. And it's going to be the darkest right underneath where 1 passes over 2. So let's take a look closer look. Okay. I just add a little bit of hatching and cross hatching to create the value there. And then what I'll tend to do is take some hatching or some, they call it stippling when you use dots, a couple of hatches, and transition from a dark value into medium into light, so I have a bit of a fade. And that's done by changing my line length or the spacing between lines. I can also outline the ribbons at this point if I want to. I usually do the hatching first and then the outlining, just so it looks a little cleaner. You can also curve your lines a little bit if your ribbon is curving, trailing it out. And you want that darkest spot right along the edge, so I'll put a lot more marks right in that space and then kind of fade them away. So it's going away from it. So now I've got a little bit of shadow being cast by ribbon number 1 onto ribbon number 2. I might also notice that the black areas are not as dark as I want them. So I can come back and shade those in a little bit more, just so there's more contrast between the values. You want to be able to tell each area apart. And if they kind of blend together too much, you got to do something to separate them. So number 2 is done. Now I'm going to move on to number 3. I'll start at one spot. Oh, look, I have some. I think I'll do a little diagonal that way, add a little curve, maybe some horizontal that I'll kind of space out. So I'll do some cross hatching right at the overlap, and then I'll kind of fade that. By adding some lines. Oh, a little bit out of view. Now this area here is being overlapped by 2 sides pretty close together. So that's going to mean that this whole area, or most of it, is going to fall into some degree of shadow. So as you're going through this, you have to kind of make some executive decisions, be like, which areas are going to be darker, where am I going to see more shadow, where might it be lighter. Alright. I like to go in order, just so I don't miss anything. And you will miss a couple of spots. You're going to have to come back and look. But you know, look at that curve right there. I want to emphasize that curve. So I'm going to draw some lines that show that curve. Come on, Mike, turn back on. Alright, so that's the job, is to then go through and apply those values all over your drawing, and you'll see that as soon as you start doing that, you start getting a sense of depth, and some areas will pop out and others will not. So, jumping ahead further along in my process. Oh wait, let me go on this one. This one's using the same pen. Okay. So here I am. Got the last couple to finish here. I think I'll come through and darken all these spots so that there's more contrast. Okay. Still have a couple of spots to do, but I want to jump ahead to how I'm going to finish this. So, if you've done all the shading, you can see most of this is done, just a couple of spots that aren't. Hopefully you've left the edges as pencil, the original border that you drew before, and you haven't added any shading there. There's nothing to cast a shadow over here, so there would be no reason to put any shadow there. One second.